Hello, everybody, and welcome to our weekly meetup, our podcast for the week. This week, we're going to be talking about science fiction, comedy, humor. We're going to get to laugh at ourselves a little bit.
Yes, and at the future.
And at the future, yes. Let's laugh at the future. Over the past many weeks, I think the science fiction has probably been a serious undertaking. We're looking at science fiction. We're looking at science fiction seriously. We're contemplating, what does this tell us about a future? What does it tell us about a particular culture and society? And yet, I don't think we've really seen a lot of comedy or lightheartedness yet.
I would agree with that. I think we've seen a lot of dreams about the future, often involving science and technology, and sometimes not turning out so great. We've definitely encountered our share of dystopias.
Right.
So what we're going to be looking at this week are some stories that poke fun at the tropes that we expect to see in science fiction. They're going to poke fun at the idea, potentially, of a dystopia. They're going to poke fun at the idea of a hero.
Yeah, and not exactly from people who are science fiction people. Charles Jane Anders is a sci-fi person and has written some science fiction books. Actually, one of the books is listed on our Goodreads as a possible semester-length novel that's there. But I think like in Galaxy Quest and in Spaceballs, you're not talking about actors and or people who typically do science fiction.
Except for Sigourney Weaver.
So that must have been a huge catch for them to get Sigourney Weaver.
She must
to
have been
play
really excited about that.
Yeah, you get to make fun of the stuff that you've taken so seriously. So
she was in the Alien movies, guys, just in case you didn't realize.
So when we're looking at this, we're now. I think the reason that we're not talking a whole lot about in the beginning about laughing and making fun of science fiction is probably because it's a genre for people who don't understand it. They do laugh at it and not take it seriously.
That's true, yeah. And maybe you did it one time, too, before you took this class.
Right. And I would think at this point you would see, wow, this is really a reflection of the culture itself. It tells us a little bit about social angst. It tells us a little bit about society's fears and concerns or hopes, for a particular future. And we do it through this form of narrative that is fiction, but it's science fiction. It's how will science either help us, save us, or destroy us.
Right, and instead of asking that in a serious way, which is where a lot of the tropes that we've talked about come from, that question of what is the future going to look like and how will we make it that way? What are our hopes for the future? This kind of makes fun of looking at our hopes for the future. Well, why is it? It kind of questions the question. Like, why is it that we think that this is the way the future should be? Why did we design this utopia?
Right.
Why do we dream about having personal robots? What comedic thing does that say about who humans are?
Right.
That we want our computers to sound like us when they talk to us.
And sometimes that laughter is in there to take the edge off of the seriousness of the topic.
Sure.
Like sometimes I think in science fiction, especially science fiction comedy and humor, they're still trying to get the same points across.
Yes.
But they're just saying, let's do this, but let's also laugh at ourselves in the process.
I think it is an opportunity for everyone participating in the medium to laugh at ourselves as humans. And that's one of the things that the academic article that you read for this week touches on. So that may have taken you a little while to get through. Jim and I read a lot of science fiction, but we are not trained in, classical literature analysis. So we were not immediately familiar with all the terms in that article too, if that makes you feel better.
Yeah. But it's good. But it's good to stretch yourself.
It's very good to stretch yourself, and it gives us a vocabulary to use to talk about this. So they talked about ideational closure, and basically, you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with the word closure. It comes from psychology, but it's just this idea that when you're reading a story, you expect there to be like a distinct beginning, middle, and an end. You expect there to be some sort of trajectory of the plot, or maybe a problem that needs to be resolved. And you want to see it get resolved, or at least addressed somehow by the end of the story. And so one of the things that gentleman was arguing is that it's expected that you'll have that kind of closure in a sci-fi story as well. But in a sci-fi story, it can be hard to throw comedy in there because it's already so difficult to design a world that is different but also familiar enough that you'll understand what's going on in the plot. And I'm sure you guys have noticed this with different stories that you've read as well. So that's hard enough on its own. Then you try and make jokes within that new world that make sense to the characters and to the readers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's quite a task. And the reason that he's talking about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books is that he and many other people feel like Adams does that comedy successfully.
Right.
But he actually does it by overturning that expectation that there's going to be closure. He says, well, you expect there to be a believable universe out there. Guess what? The universe isn't believable. Right. It's crazy. It's chaotic. Right. And so you're not going to have closure at the end of this anyway, so we might as well have fun.
So yeah, there's in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you have Douglas Adams. It's coming from a British humor perspective, I think, to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so, as Becky's saying, you have to make certain that the jokes come off.
Yes.
They come across to the readers, but they also seem plausible that they would be part of.
Yeah, they have to make sense in the story.
Right. So he has to know comedy, but he also has to know science fiction to do this well. Mm-hmm. It's easy to make fun of something. We make fun of things all the time.
Sure.
And we make fun of things sometimes because we don't know them and we don't understand them.
Right, and they make us nervous.
They make us nervous. So what do? We laugh about it. We laugh at it, not necessarily with. And I think the difference to some of these science fiction comedies is that they're laughing with one another,
yes,
not at each other. And I think that Adams does that very well because he writes a very solid science fiction story and a series of stories, yet is still able to do it tongue-in-cheek. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's an extremely difficult thing to do, and that's probably why Groff chose to pick him for his article,
right?
In this particular way. And he makes comparisons, though, back in that article to the comedic hero, or the epic something.
Yeah. So he's saying that Adams's books are like a mock epic, and
right.
epics are these stories that have a hero, the type of hero right. that you would expect.
Yeah, and and mock epic, mock heroic, one of those two things. And so, I mean, we were talking previously. It's that idea of the hero who's a buffoon mm-hmm. in some ways, yet we laugh at the person, and he still accomplishes.
He's still the hero.
There's still a closure.
Yeah, there's a closure.
There's a closure. It's not sort of just like, we did all this, we worked all this, we laughed all the way, and we get to the end and there's failure.
And it was pointless.
And it's pointless.
Yeah.
That's not the case with this. There's closure, and this has some meaning. And it's usually the sidekicks, as you were saying earlier, the people come alongside
that actually get the actual work done. We were saying that this happens a lot in Shakespeare, that the hero of the story is actually kind of a fool. Mm-hmm. And so it's poking fun at that idea that there is always a hero who comes and saves everything. That's right. The trope. When it's actually like his underlings or the people who he's friends with who actually right. end up like pulling off the big plot device.
Right.
This is a little bit of a sidetrack, and I don't know if you would agree with this, Jim, but one thing I always noticed in the Harry Potter novels was that, yeah, Harry was good at what he did, but half the time he didn't die because his friends saved him.
Right. Right. He would never have gotten as far as he would have gotten without that. So he was bumbling along. Now, he was not the comedic relief, though.
He was not always, no.
He was the up-and-coming, immature, young hero who you never see reach full potential, mm-hmm. but always on the edge of breaking through that potential. I think the Weasleys provide a lot of the comedic humor.
They do, alongside. And Hermione makes fun of all of them.
She does.
She provides comedy.
She's
as well.
But Hermione becomes the every person.
Yeah.
Because she was, the way she was raised by, mudbloods, and
yes.
But yet has the potential. So she's in a world that's different than herself too. So when you look at those characters, and those types of characters fit certain tropes, which we've talked about before, mm-hmm. certain model of how the literature should go. And so, if we're talking about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or in our case, the Fermi paradox, we're seeing some of these tropes come into play.
You could look at the two main characters in the Fermi paradox as being the space explorers.
Right.
Right? And so you know that they're on this ship and they've been traveling for thousands of years, and you don't know exactly why at the beginning of the story, and you get filled in more and more as the reader as you go along. But at the beginning, I don't know about you guys, because of the tropes that I've observed before in science fiction of the explorers, I expect that they're like trying to, meet new aliens and find new resources and, do it for the glory of learning new things. Right. And you find out they're just business people.
Yeah, it's just a bureaucratic. It's a bureaucratic hostile takeover, closing down the firm. It's the people you bring into the declining business and have them sell off all the assets, to harvest everything that's left there to take care of, close up shop, and then move on to the next sort of foreclosure.
Right, and there are these two individuals who never come in contact with anyone else besides their computer the whole time they're traveling, because every time they show up, the species is already dead. They're just collecting all of the stuff that they left behind.
Right, their interaction is just with themselves, and they spend time in stasis, so we're talking a very long time of it just being them, and so we get this sort of comedy duo.
Yeah, they are
like lots of successful sitcoms, lots of old vaudeville acts, whatever else are the comedy duo. But in this case, we have the bumbling, grotesque aliens with tentacles who vomit and spew and gurgle and do all these sorts of disgusting things, because that's the trope of an alien. It's all tentacly, whatever you want to say.
Full of tentacles,
and and has oozes weird slime, and does all these different things, and so we have that sort of thing taking place, and we have the conventional trope, which is in real science fiction, which is in serious science fiction, and is also in comedic science fiction, which is the communication, the inability to communicate between species. Goes on. If we go back to Star Trek, Next Generation, we have that famous scene with Captain Picard on the planet with the other alien, where if the idea is that if they can spend time together in a similar situation, they'll leave understanding one another. And so the one alien race talks in story and narrative and parable, and talks about the river Tamok in winter, and Jalad and someone on the sea. You know what I mean? This idea, they talk this way in allegorical fashion. It's the communication struggling. We see Data, trying to figure out how to understand human behavior, and has communication faux pas and becomes the comedic relief a lot of times in Star Trek Next Generation. Spock occasionally is that, in some of the films. So comedy plays a role in helping us to not fear the alien, the unknown, the strange, because if we can laugh at them, then they have to be harmless, right? They can't be malicious, evil, So, we take that trope, and we have these aliens who have to use a communicator to try to communicate, with Earthlings, in this case. And so it's just sort of a comedic way to do that, Like, the brackets. We were talking about that in reading it. You have to know that the brackets are meant to be some tentacle language garbled,
that doesn't directly translate into English, you can see that when you're reading the story, that some of the translations are in brackets, and I think it's really the topic itself is sad, right? Because you've got these two main characters that are is it John and Tuku? I always forget her name.
I think it's John and Tuku.
Basically they create
Toku,
they create all of these species and then just wait for them to destroy themselves so that they can take their resources. So it's really sad, and the humans are like trying to understand this, but then the way that they react brings up so many tropes that you see in sci-fi that should be familiar, right? Because the humans at one point are like, wait a minute, like, why would you want us to go away? It's inconceivable to them why John and Toku aren't as excited about seeing them as they are to see John and Toku.
Right, because they were supposed to have reached closure. You know what I mean? They were supposed to reach full closure.
There's this concept, and if you've watched any Star Trek at all, you can relate to this concept that humans always want to explore more. They want to discover new things. Yes, it's great if you make money, but like it's just for the exploration. And so the humans, the way they react, it's funny, I think, because they literally can't comprehend why these aliens wouldn't want to meet them and get to know them, why they wouldn't want to share their histories and their stories, because the humans are so excited to do that.
Right. And I think with these civilizations, it reminds me of playing video games like SimCity or something like that, where the Sims, the characters in the game are supposed to produce these things for you so that you can harvest them and use them to do more building. I mean, that's sort of what this, or Sid Meier's Civilization, those kinds of games. So you have this taking place, and I think it's interesting that, these aliens aren't violent,
no, and
dangerous. They even say, we've never killed anyone
they
ever.
They really stress that. Like, we're not murderers. We haven't hurt anyone.
I still like, like when one of the humans is asking the question, and it was one of the lines here, and I'll read, he says, what kind of, and then in brackets it says, night predators, are you? And he's thinking, what, we've never harmed anyone. We've been doing this for, who knows how long. And we just, you weren't supposed to live,
Right.
You were supposed to be dead when we came.
There was not supposed to be a relationship of any kind, so then there's no ethical obligation, and now we don't know what to do because you're still alive.
Introverted nerd aliens, right? They're just like accountants. Again, they just don't want to deal with any people. They just want to crunch the numbers, gather the resources.
And it's taking place in a world that's obviously unfamiliar to us, but I think is very relatable because it comes back to what Jim was talking about, the difficulty of communication between species. That's something that we can all relate to because we all relate with different species mostly on a daily basis.
Right.
If you have any pets or if you have birds in your yard or whatever, like that communication barrier is there. And then you also have this, I lost what I was going to say.
Talking to animals again?
The talking animals.
Animals.
I'm gonna let Jim pick this back up because I lost my thread.
Well, I think it might stem along the lines. What I was, hearing from you is this: what happens when creation meets creator?
Yes, that's where I was going.
And so you have the Fermi, this Fermi paradox. These Felusian, whatever they are, they're supposedly the creators of Earth.
Right.
They created Earth. They planted the humans on. Or they did all these different things so that they would live their cycle,
dig up all the riches from the center of the earth,
right, and then they come along and can gather them and move on, but the Earthlings are seeing them as like, wait a minute, we're facing our creators for the first time,
which is very meaningful for them.
It's very meaningful for them. It's like, and these aliens are like, can you just please leave our ship? Can you just please go back?
Go away and finish the process of dying.
Yeah, we'll come back later once you're all dead. So it's that idea that it also makes we talk about themes, we talk about tropes in science fiction, but we talk about in class different themes. And so when you're talking about a theological theme, it's this idea that a creator creates the world, sets it in motion, and goes away.
Yep.
With no intention of ever engaging in that world again, not touching the world, not being part of the world. So you've had these people in this story crying out to whatever they've called God and formed a religion, and nobody's been listening.
Right.
Okay. So the creator finally shows up, hoping that they're all dead finally, so they can gather the resources because they serve no purpose other than bees to make honey. It's very similar to that, like the idea of if you could have bees that would create and build hives, fill them full of honey, and then die off or just go away.
Yeah.
And you could walk along and go, more honey for me.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this Fermi paradox story is talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's dark humor.
Yeah. That's very dark.
It's dark humor. It's also dark because as humans, and you see this in a lot of sci-fi, especially like Star Trek and Star Wars, you have this hope that once we finally figure out as humans that we're not alone and that there are other species out there, we have this expectation that the other species are going to be more advanced than us, that they're going to know more things than we do, and that they're going to share that with us. There's also, the people who are scared that they're going to destroy us, and we have movies about that too.
Right.
But part of the whole creator-created thing that I was thinking about, thank you, Jim, was the idea of like, what would happen if I'm a biologist, so I think about these things sometimes. We have genetically engineered mice, for example, that are missing specific genes so that we can test cancer treatments on them. What happened if all of a sudden we could talk to them and they could talk to us, and they were like, so what are the plans for after this experiment is over?
Right.
And we know that they're just going to get killed.
Yeah, you have the cure, right?
Right? You know, like, aren't you going to fix me? Like, hey, let's go out and get dinner later. And it's like, no, you know, and it kind of goes back to the dogs of North Park too. Like, what happens when you suddenly, we haven't created dogs, right? But if we as humans suddenly could talk to the things that we created, and they were like, hey, so what's up? What's gonna, you know, happen next?
Yeah.
That would be incredibly unnerving.
Well, let's go back to the wub.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to when dinner talks back. You know, kind of, because that was an alien inside a creature that was.
It was a pig.
You know, but the pig was the pig, but the alien inside the pig was a different alien that travels the universe. So even the alien inside the wub was interested in what a wub tasted like. But but to go back to that, and the pig's like, well, you know, the wub's like, why aren't we drawing straws?
Right.
Why are you just assuming that you're going to eat me?
Right.
You know, it's like, shouldn't you be eating the least, you know, important person? And I think that I have a lot more to offer than everybody else on this ship, you know. So you have this event that takes place. And I think, you know, one of the things when we were looking at this Fermi paradox earlier was this idea of where they start to talk to the humans, and they're not supposed to.
Right.
It goes back to the prime directive in Star Trek, right? You don't interact with other alien life forms unless they already have, you know, warp drive and everything else, right? So they've made the mistake of interacting with them, which is the first, they've broken that law already, but they go on to talk to them, and the one person's like, stop it, you're giving them hope.
Yes.
You know, and it's like, that's what someone would expect from their creator.
Yes, to be given
to give
hope.
And the creator's like, no, I don't want you to have hope. I want you to just finish up and die.
So that we can collect all your medals.
Right, you know. So it really is dark. It really is funny. I mean, I think that if you read through the story the first time and didn't get the humor, I would really encourage you to read through it again, because it's not a long story to begin with.
No, and especially the physical comedy. I mean, to start off the story with having somebody throw up because their stomach is upset, and then, you know, they have speaking tentacles that get knotted up when they're nervous, and, you know, they're different from us, but they're similar enough that I think the physical comedy is actually really funny.
And that's a good point. They're different from us entirely by their physical structure, their shape, their language, whatever else, but because a human being wrote them, they have human characteristics.
Yeah.
And so we're able to connect to them.
They can get embarrassed.
Yeah.
They can get stressed.
Right.
They can get fearful.
All those things. And so, you know, here is the idea that it's the day that the job just didn't go the way the job was supposed to go.
Right. You wake up ready to do a job. And
right. It's supposed to be a simple, you know, hunt and retrieve mission, you know, and it turns into a whole encounter that they didn't want to have and weren't prepared to have.
No.
You know, they weren't, I mean, from the rest of the culture, their particular job was they weren't the actual creators to begin with. The whole alien civilization was who populated the universe, like planting a garden, you know, with all these worlds, and their job was just to travel around and scoop up the resources. So I think that that's really an interesting way to look at that, you know, and it twists. Even though it's funny, it's a little dark, it still makes social commentary. It still makes theological commentary. It still is saying something about our culture, humanity, the way we would interact with things.
There's a hugely classic trope in this story that you can I know I keep bringing up Star Trek, but I mean, it really comes up in Star Trek. This idea that, oh yeah, civilizations in the past, you know, they collapsed, but that's not going to happen to us because we're humans. Humans have these unique characteristics that keep us, you know, able to pull through at the last minute, and Captain Kirk is absolutely famous for that idea. So the fact that these humans, once they found out their creators weren't going to give them what they wanted, were basically like, we're going to stay alive just to spite you, and we're going to come and find you because we're humans, that's what we do. And these aliens are obviously scared about that. And so it refers to that trope, but then it also refers to the trope, well, I don't know if it's a trope, but the idea of when you're looking at any of these alien encounter stories, we don't really know how we're going to react to aliens.
No.
We don't really know how aliens would react to us.
No.
It could be that on both sides we will be completely unprepared.
Well, look at
for what happens.
Look at the Talik and the Terrans.
Right.
You know, the idea that the Terrans come to a planet that's already has these insect-like creatures, and immediately they're insect-like creatures.
So they start killing them,
right? And they're attacking us. So hence they're insect-like creatures that are predators. You know, so we're going to kill them off and take this planet and take these resources. But it doesn't work out that way for them. but so, that interaction didn't quite turn out the way the humans intended it to turn out,
Right.
in that particular story. And I think it's the same way with this, is that, that's a common trope, the misunderstanding,
Yes.
and the miscommunication that takes place, and the way in which we approach that. So, I think, so these aliens go to sleep, and they go back to sleep for another 1,000 years.
Yeah. In the hopes that the humans have died.
Had died off, but they're on another station, which means they'd be another 1,000 years to even come back. So it'd be 2,000 more years to come back, and they would hope by then that they've reached full closure.
Well, and I think the part too where John makes sure that the computer wakes them up after a certain amount of time, instead of just saying, when the humans are dead, wake us up, because they've realized that something they thought they knew about the universe, which is that the species always dies within a certain amount of time, now they know is not true. Right. So there's commentary on that thought that, like, the universe is understandable and we know things about it as well. Right.
And that goes back to exactly the Fermi paradox itself.
Yes.
But it's also a lot of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which, if you get a chance to watch the movie, it's not so bad. But if you really get an opportunity to read the book, the humor is, you have to get it, but it's very complicated in the sense that it's easy to read, but you start getting let in on some of these jokes and stuff. And we talked earlier, before we started doing the podcast, was that we see a lot of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy showing up in Doctor Who. The idea the Doctor sees the end of the universe, but also sees the beginning of the universe and still can function, in between those things. The idea of communication is a big part of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because of the babblefish. They go in their ear and interpret things for them. It's a fish that lives inside their ear and can help them to interpret, But that also happens, the idea of a lot of shows. I was trying to think of one. So there's a couple. So there's a lot of science fiction shows that have become successful because they incorporate humor and seriousness and drama all into one, because it makes it more palatable, receivable, I think, by people that are watching that. So Farscape, for instance, was a series that was on for a while, which incorporated a lot of Jim Henson's puppets and things like that, which I could see Charlie Jane being influenced a lot by that, knowing that she watched it, But the idea that there was bodily function jokes from aliens was part of Farscape. That they couldn't understand anybody until they had the communicator implanted into their system. Just constant, we've encountered aliens and they're not what we thought they were going to be, and this is very confusing, and being almost like Alice in Wonderland, which is another aspect, not science fiction, but really another aspect of the trope of
the encounter,
of being cast into an alternate world, a different world other than your own, and you have to learn to navigate it. You have to learn the system of communication that's there. You have to understand the way in which you're going to navigate this world as well. So, jumping to Galaxy Quest, right? So, Galaxy Quest, big play on Star Trek for those that watched it. It is also the premise of what happens when we miscommunicate to aliens. And aliens interpret the miscommunication.
Right. And I mean, in this case, the cast of the show never intended to communicate to aliens in the first place.
No, it was considered like a one-off bad sci-fi show.
Right.
They got canceled.
That the aliens just happened to pick up.
They picked up the broadcast of it, and they came wanting to see these heroes of Earth, and they needed them to help them.
Yep.
And there's a lot of great actors in that are also in science fiction shows.
Yeah,
too.
so if you didn't watch that movie, just very briefly, like, Galaxy Quest is a TV show in the movie, and the actors are, all after the TV show has happened. They're has-been actors.
At Comic-Cons.
And then these aliens who watched the show and think that they are a real spaceship crew come asking for their help, and they get taken into space and have to act like an actual spaceship crew. And so, obviously, the comedy ensues from that, because it's like, what's real and what's not real? We were pretending, but are we pretending now? And how can you tell whether we're pretending or not?
Yeah, like in the commercials, or in those old commercials where it says, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
Yes.
That's very much taking that spoof and saying, I'm not really a spaceship commander, but I've played one on TV. How hard could this be?
Right.
And it's funny how they begin to... They find out something about themselves, and they go from buffoon to being able to live into their role. Right.
No, they absolutely do. And I mean, it's sort of related to that theme we've talked about before, that, humans that maybe don't get along really well all of a sudden work together as a team because
Right.
they're up against a common enemy.
Right.
And that happens here too. These actors who had grown to not really like each other that much and,
Have to pull together.
have to pull together and actually be a starship crew.
But it's the epic heroic, or the epic, you know what I mean? It's that idea of they find the hero within.
Yes.
And they all find a purpose. Here they were in a world where they had pretended to be heroes.
Right.
Were considered washed up actors and had lost their drive,
And their
love, whatever else,
self-respect.
and their hope.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they find themselves out in the galaxy saving the world.
Yeah. Like, we need you, so you either have to help us or
That's right.
you're just as washed up as you thought you
That's
were.
right. And I would say that a direct play on that, although I can't tell you when the comic book first started, was Guardians of the Galaxy. That you get Guardians of the Galaxy, you get the same thing. You get a character who is from Earth, but had an alien father, which you don't know about in the first movie, but you find out about later on, who is an Earthling who gets gets taken up into space, and then pulls together a ragtag group of misfits, to be able to save the galaxy, and comedy ensues, with all of the heroics that are going on, and there's a lot of comedic moments in that science fiction too, but the story's solid, the science fiction's solid, and yet we can laugh and cheer and cry and do all of these mix of emotions that go on, with that particular show. And, I think Star Wars, Spaceball plays on that too. The idea that here's Spaceballs, which is a play on Star Wars, which again is about a ragtag group of people.
Yep, who get together for a common cause.
And overthrow the tyrant of the galaxy, in some ways, or at least start the momentum that moves towards that direction.
I think different people will feel different ways about these movies, but I feel like Spaceballs is a little bit more directly parodying Star Wars.
Right.
I mean, obviously, Galaxy Quest is definitely playing off of Star Trek.
Right.
But I was left at the end of the movie feeling like it was saying, yeah, some of the plot lines and the way the characters interact in Star Trek are pretty corny and show male chauvinism, show prejudices of the time period in which they were produced.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's about people trying to be able to relate effectively together and do good. Like, I felt like at the end of that one, it wasn't trashing Star Trek. Not that Spaceballs is trashing Star Wars, but I think it's much more pointedly being like, wow, what a silly bunch of movies these were, and this is why we enjoy them so much. I'm going to poke holes in those.
And I don't think, though, that Spaceball had any... I don't think Mel Brooks, in doing Spaceballs or any of his movies, really is trying to redeem those films.
That's a perfect word. That is what I'm looking for. I think Galaxy Quest is a little bit of an apology for Star Trek. It's a little bit of a, like, let's redeem the good that comes out of these stories.
But these people are, can have good qualities. And if they're placed in the situation, can they do this? Spaceballs is farce.
It's total... I mean, all
satire,
Mel Brooks's films are just total farce.
But it does contain commentary. It laughs.
Oh, it does.
It laughs at a lot of the isms that are going on. I mean, it laughs at sexuality. It laughs at sexism. It laughs at racism. It laughs at all of these things with the intention of not being sexist and not being racist, but to laugh at that, and that idea that we can overcome the hatred that's involved in these things by... Some people believe, why can't we just all get along and laugh at ourselves?
Right.
Let's stop taking ourselves so seriously and let's laugh at who we are.
And Mel Brooks is absolutely famous for that. I mean, in one of his movies, he makes up a musical where Hitler is the main star.
Springtime for Hitler.
Like, he makes fun of Hitler, and that's not something that is, like, easy to do. That's not something that everybody thinks should be done. But he is one of those people that says, these are some expectations that we hold about ourselves as human beings. These are the things that we say are taboo. Let's look at why they're taboo, and let's see if we can laugh at ourselves a little bit about this.
Right. And, History of the World, Mel Brooks' History of the World, Part 1, which never had a Part 2, which, again, is a play on...
He never does a sequel.
Never does a sequel. Although he's talking about doing a Spaceballs sequel.
He is.
He is talking about that. So, I mean, in all of these, whether you watched Spaceballs or watched Galaxy Quest, and, when you think about the Fermi paradox, there are still some serious insights into society and culture. There are some things that we can look at this to ask ourselves, who we are as human beings. What would we do if we were placed in these particular situation? And that ability to be able to laugh, I think, at ourselves has some healing factor into it.
Yes, and I think in Spaceballs in particular, you look at the leadership of I'll just call them the bad guys. Obviously mocking the bad guys from Star Wars, because instead of Darth Vader, you have Dark Helmet, and he's a tiny guy, Rick Moranis, who's wearing this gigantic helmet, right, to try and compensate for his physical appearance. And the leaders of the bad guys in that movie are just so clearly incompetent. The only reason that people are following them is because people are afraid of them, but they don't even really know why.
Right.
And so that, I feel like, is not only commentary on Darth Vader and the Emperor in Star Wars as villains, but I think it's also commentary on the leaders that we have in real life.
Right.
Like, what are some questions we should be asking ourselves about our leaders? Like, are they just wearing a big black shiny helmet and that's why we're afraid of them?
Yeah.
Or, like, do they pose a legitimate threat? Are they actually intelligent people?
Well, to take that into a very, very contemporary political setting, all right. In the comic books, in the most recent version of some of the Marvel comic books, and I know most of you, I don't think any of you, some of you are prior readers, I don't know. But anyways, and in a comic book, sometimes they'll have different universes, right? So in one of the new series that's done really well, that came out of last year, was Gwen Stacy from Spider-Man, who was Spider-Man's girlfriend, dies in the regular line of the Spider-Man comics and different things. In an alternate universe, Gwen Stacy gets bitten by the spider instead of Peter. And so she becomes the spider heroine. And in that universe, as there was a character known as MODOK in the regular Marvel universe, but it's MODAK or something, this other one. So the most recent version of the comic book with Gwen and in the adventures was this MODAK character who had an orange complexion and he's all head. This character's a weird alien that's all head with tiny arms and feet. He wears a massive helmet and because he's supposed to be all brain, right? So that's the thing. It remind me of Dark Helmet and all that sort of stuff. So, but here they draw the character in the comic book. You can go pick up an issue if you wanted to through your Comixology app or whatever else. He's orange skinned, crazy blonde wavy hair all over the place.
We'll just let
tiny hands.
We'll just let you interpret who that is poking fun at.
And has lines like he's building walls and he has lines about. So, anyways, the idea of pulling contemporary, like this decade's politics, into the comic books and into a science fiction storyline is not uncommon. And it goes back to how do you defeat people? You make their buffoons. So you have the opposite of buffoon. You have the buffoon who's the heroic buffoon who bumbles along but is good-hearted
and is lovable.
And everyone comes along and helps him or her accomplish what they need to do. And then you have the comedic villain that you can have now, with this satirical sci-fi, whom we can laugh at and who is portrayed as someone, and as a representation of someone. So that's why when you read books, we've talked about looking at them in a historical context. The same thing could be with any piece of media. Look at it in its historical context. What year was it done? What was going on in that year? What would have informed that piece of literature, that piece of media, that piece of art? What would have been brought into that conversation? You can watch it, 3 decades later and laugh but miss some of the direct
Absolutely.
intention.
Spaceballs makes fun of Star Wars, but it also makes fun of at least 3 or 4 other movies that were famous at that particular time. So if you haven't seen all of those, then you're not going to get all of the innuendo. But I think that one of the things that you can probably take away from this week is the acknowledgement that putting comedy into sci-fi can be a little bit tricky because you are combining 2 genres together and you want to do justice to both genres. But it is possible. It's been done before and it can be done in a couple of different ways. Spaceballs is very much farcical, so you can go totally over the top with the things that you're making fun of because the whole point of the movie is to make fun of things and it just happens to take place in space. You can look at Galaxy Quest, which is kind of trying to contextualize why we're so obsessed with Star Trek. Like,
Right.
what is it about Star Trek that
Right.
really
Right.
gets to us, that we
Right.
love, that, you know, makes so many movies get produced about it?
Trekkies versus Trekkers, you know. That's
Right. Like, what is it about that concept of the future really appeals to us, and why does it continue to appeal to us?
Right. Right. So, you know, if you take, so sort of just to pull all this together from this week, I mean, we need to be able to laugh at ourselves. We need to be able to laugh at these sorts of things. But even in this sort of satire, I think it makes it more receivable to a general population.
Right, right.
You know, it's like the book, some students in the past have read the Wizardry 2.0, Wizards 2.0 book, which is really a lot of 80s pop culture and comedy mixed into that science fiction. It's out there, and it's out there for a particular reason. So it still has something to say. And the author's still trying to say something. It has something to say because of when it was written, how it was written, and who received it. But it's okay to still laugh, you know.
And sometimes it can be really educational to do that, to look at the ways that
Mm-hmm.
we've pictured the future in the past and ask ourselves, wow, why did we picture it that way?
That's right.
Would we still want it to be that way? What would we change about it now? And an easy way to do that is to kind of poke fun at it.
Right. So really, I hope you enjoyed this week. I hope you enjoyed the Fermi Paradox. You know, we went through several short stories to try to find that one.
That was the one we liked the
There's a
best.
lot of free little short stories out there. You know, and there's lots of movies we could have picked, but we try to pick some classic
We
ones.
picked the big ones.
Yeah. So we hope you enjoyed the week. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. I really hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Have a great week. We'll